Will Goldstein here, thekingscourt.com. Always a chance to subscribe down there by hitting that little button. As always, you can check out my music at thekingscourt.com, books, digital albums, or at all the links at my channel page. I'm continuing with C.S. Lewis's book, Screwtape Letters, and this is number 18. He doesn't name them, and this one's called Being in Love. I'm paraphrasing, I'm not reading it, I'm just taking out the main points. Screwtape is addressing Wormwood. Wormwood, you have learned the technique of sexual temptation. Well, first of all, we've already hit a point because he already moves on, so I'm just gonna, kind of dwell on that for a moment. So look, there's lots of ways of sexual temptation. It made me think of a song I wrote. It's in my current book that's coming out. It's called The Bedazzlements of the Devil. It's all about I'm winging this. I didn't think about this till just now. So it's about a guy walking down the street and he sees some pretty, I think in the song it's called Fling. She's walking down the street, and his mind goes and gets twisted in all kinds of directions. You're looking on the internet, you're watching a movie, there's sex scenes, there's pornography. You go into your YouTube channel and there's all kinds of advertisements for women. It's everywhere. So it's like impossible to escape the temptations and towards sexual impurity. He calls it sexual temptation, and the ways that someone might gratify that. I don't need to go into the list, but people, what are they called? I forgot what they're called. I knew about what it was called. Hookup sites. That's it. Hookup sites. It's an extremely dark world. Okay, so sexual temptation. The enemy's demand on humans comes in two forms as a dilemma: either complete abstinence or unmitigated monogamy. So let's just start with the first one, complete abstinence. Well, this is extremely difficult, when God created Adam, he said it's not good for him to be alone. So the story of Eve, I don't need to go into it, from his ribs, and Eve was created, and God said that this was good. Well, and then of course we have creation, and we have the world around us, and all of us that exist. Well, so when someone chooses chastity, which is basically complete abstinence, it's one thing to choose it, and then even if a person does choose it, for example, a priest, well, that can be very difficult. And you have the history of the Catholic Church and all the failures therein, as they are forced into that, and a lot of them, some of the popes have even had children. So it's just, it's so most Christian religions are a little more common sense than that, and realize that their pastors or priests can actually be married. And so that's a matter of choice. But then, of course, there's always the other side of it where somebody wants to be married, and perhaps they can't find a woman that they want to marry, or vice versa, or they can't find anybody that's suitable to them, or they're maybe not presentable themselves, and they just don't have the mental capacity. So for whatever reason, they are either choose a life of chastity with all its difficulties, or they're forced into it. So that's a real Pandora's box that opens there, and demons can definitely take advantage of that. And then the other one is unmitigated or absolute monogamy. So with that, well, that just simply means exactly what it says. You get married and you have, if you're a man, then you have a wife, and that's it. No sex outside of that with any other person, as long as you are married to that one person. So the latter, which is the one I just said, for the last few centuries, we, meaning the demons, have persuaded the humans that being in love is the only respectable ground for marriage, and ought to render this excitement permanent that which does not do so is no longer binding. So what he means by that is, in the last few centuries, is historically marriages were not based on being in love. They might have been in love afterwards or learned to love one another, but it was arranged by parents, and it was the dowry and all that. In recent centuries, the human mind has been, according to this, persuaded by demons that unless it's real love, then there should be no marriage. I'm not going to say yay or nay or that. To that, obviously, it's better if you are in love. But the point is that they're trying to make it is because of that, then if somebody gets married to somebody and then love no longer exists, the flame of it is not still there present the way it was when you first got married, well, then that's grounds for them to leave the marriage, because if there's no genuine love there, then there's no grounds for marriage, so they take off. It's not binding. So that's the point that C.S. Lewis is trying to make in all this. And of course, anyone who is married and wants to stay married, they should work at trying to maintain that flame and that love within them so that the marriage is a lot better and more sustainable. Hell rests on the recognition of the axiom that one thing is not another, and what one gains, another loses. I think he's implying from that if somebody is married or even in a relationship and they're not married, and then that person says, well, I don't feel it anymore, and they go on, they dump the person, well, they move on to their next, kind of like taking a piece of chocolate off a platter that comes by. Well, I'll try this one, and then I'll try that one, and they just move forward. And of course, they're leaving all the broken hearts behind and the people that genuinely thought that the person loved them, and then they were just dumped out like a piece of trash. So that's what he's saying is, it's when you choose someone else and you get rid of that, there's consequences to that person. And of course, the selfish person who's doing that is only thinking about their own pleasure and what they're going to get out of it. They're not thinking about the pain they're causing the person that they're dumping on the side of the road. Inanimate objects exclude all other objects from the space it occupies. It expands by thrusting other objects aside or absorbs them. A self does the same, thrusts them aside or absorbs them. Beasts absorb by eating others. Demons suck the will and freedom out of a weaker self. To be really means to be in competition. So again, it's competition in love. I loved you, but now I don't, and now I love her. Was it ever really love? The enemy's philosophy is to evade this. The many are also one. So when he says the enemy, it's called from their context of the way they're thinking, the enemy is God. So the many are also one. The good of one is the good of another. So in other words, it's like the unity of the spirit. Hegel, his idea of the concept of the spirit, this universal spirit. Well, that's a little bit what they're saying here. The good of one is the good of another, because we are all just one in this universal ocean spirit of consciousness. Then, of course, there's the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you, and love other people and treat them the way that you want to be treated. This idea of all being one, God calls love. This can be detected under all he does and even all he is or claims to be. He claims to be three as well as one. So he's giving reference to the Holy Trinity, three in one. God is love. Well, if God existed and there's just God and he's by himself, who did he love? So even before the existence of the angels, it would be logical to assume that this unity within the Trinity, there was love. So love existed as a primal entity before eternity began. Okay, from the very beginning, God existed within himself in love within the Trinity. The world and the universe that we see is just a extension of that in his mind. At the other end, he introduces into matter parts made to cooperate. So when people get married or in their love, they stay, together. It's easiest to stay together if you cooperate. It's very difficult to stay together in a relationship where people cannot cooperate with one another and where people cannot be reasonable with one another. So if one of the entities in that relationship is not reasonable, then it becomes extremely difficult to stay together, because you have to have some groundwork of sanity, not delusion and fantasy, and just be able to partake in reality for you to be able to stay together. You have to be able to cooperate. It has to be a reasonableness. So what I'm saying to you makes sense, instead of just relativism where there is no absolute truth, and you can believe what you believe and I believe what I believe, and so therefore we shall never connect. Basically, it's reality. Meaning God's motive for sex is the method of reproduction. Sex, from one point of view, might have been one more mode in which a stranger preyed upon the weaker, like spiders, where the bride concludes by eating her groom. This is the way the demons are looking at it. But the enemy, meaning God, in this context, has associated affection with sexual desire. Thank goodness for that. There's no black widows in God's kingdom. He has made offspring dependent on parents, producing the family, like the organism. The members are distinct, united, and they are united in love. So he's talking about, what happens. The culmination of a marriage, of course, is to have children in most marriages, and so there's a family, a unit, and that love can exist in between all the members of that one united family. The enemy, again God, because this is demons talking, described a married couple as one flesh. He did not say a happily married couple or a couple in love, but you can make humans ignore that. So that's the advice of Screwtape. You can make humans ignore the fact that they're one flesh. It's not related to the fact that they're happy in that state. Being happy in that state is totally dependent on the willingness of the partners within that state to cooperate. If they do not cooperate, and if they do not take their vows seriously, then they're not going to be happy. But they're still, in God's eyes, one flesh. So the demons are saying, well, see, we can get them under certain circumstances to abandon that idea of the one flesh. You can get humans to accept being in love as only sexual intercourse. So some people, I'm sure, think that being in love is just that. That's all they want. And maybe they even call it being in love. In other words, there's no real affection that's involved. It's just carnal pleasure. It's just gratification of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and somebody finds somebody sexually attractive or physically beautiful, so they want to have sex. And so then they may persuade themselves that they're in love, when it really has nothing to do with love, which is based on affection. The truth is, when a man lies with a woman, whether they like it or not, a transcendental relationship is set up between them, which is eternally enjoyed or eternally endured. I found that to be very interesting. So that's what he said. This relation was intended to produce the family. Humans can be made to accept the false belief that affection, fear, and desire, which they call being in love, is the only thing that makes marriage happy or holy. Again, so he's saying that they can be made to think that. So if there's no longer that love and that desire, then they're not happy and this marriage is not holy, is what the demons are saying. So that's their excuse to get you to separate. Being in love often precedes marriages, which is true. In fact, in our society, people at least are convinced that they're in love. Whether they truly are or not is another matter. But it often precedes marriages made in obedience to, let's just say, God's designs, with the intention of fidelity, fertility, and goodwill. So in most marriages, maybe more of them, maybe more of them not in our current society, but at least in my time, fidelity was still important, to have that intention of fidelity and to hold to it, and the goodwill that you extended to your spouse. Then the demons are saying, well, two advantages follow. Humans who have not the gift of continence can be deterred from seeking marriage because they do not find themselves in love. And the idea of marrying with any other motive seems cynical. They don't want to marry because they have to feel like they're in love. So he said, who don't have the gift of continence, well, that's basically the ability to control yourself. If they can't control themselves, that means it's difficult for them to go without sex or to be chaste. And so if they can't find someone to love, well, then they will go and find where they can have sex with someone else because they don't have the gift, like he said, of continence. So then they go and seek sexual relationships outside of marriage. If they're not in love, they still want to have sex, is basically what he's saying. The demons say the humans can be made to regard loyalty, partnership for mutual help, and for transmission of life is something lower than a storm of emotion. Did a video on Eros. So it's just that sexuality in the relationship combined with the emotions. The highest form, the demons are saying, for the humans is that they need to have that storm of emotion. And if they don't have that storm of emotion, then they don't regard it worthwhile. They can't see the value in the relationship for the transmission of life or for a partnership or anything of that nature where they're partners together as helpmates, as the Bible puts it. And these people who think that way are going to find marriage service, he uses that word, which is talking about sex. There's an expectation when two people are married that they're going to have sex. So he's calling it marriage service, and they can find that offensive because they're no longer in love. And so they don't want to participate in that. They would, well, adultery. They would go out and find somebody else that they would rather have their sexual union with. Sexual infatuation, which intends marriage and regarded as love, will excuse a man from all the guilt and protect him from the consequences of marrying a heathen, a fool, or a wanton, promiscuous woman. If you get together with someone, not that you're married or you're going to marry, just you're intending this idea of marriage, meaning that the two of you say you're in love, so you stay together, but you don't get married, because if you don't get married, you are protecting yourself from the possibility that you could end up marrying, as a consequence, a heathen, a fool, or a wanton, promiscuous woman, or somebody who's not loyal. So rather than put yourself into that position and subject yourself to that, the answer that the demons are giving is just be in love and don't marry and go on and commit your fornication. May God help us all.